the music! Hello! I got all the mics unchecked and the music wouldn't stop. Oh my word.
It's kind of nice that you kind of like fade in with, although that wasn't really smooth jazz. I don't, what do you call that music?
You know, it's a reggae playlist. And
Okay.
sometimes it's kind of like dubstep, ska. Sometimes it's I don't know what, but anyway.
And you got a friend there.
My little pet. Yeah, I'd forgotten about my little pet. It's actually Double T's pet. You know, and when you have a turtle in a turtleneck.
The pet looks bigger than Double T.
Oh no. Just But the best part is it's a shearable sheep. So its little coat, it actually has a little a shearer is its little zipper pull, and you unzip its fleece and its fleece comes off. And you have a shear.
Wow, it really is just that easy.
I've never tried to shear a sheep, but I've seen it done, and it does not look easy.
Hi, Esther says, what? I need one.
Amazon.
Oh.
Yeah, they're from
and
Amazon.
Janet is coming to us from a very sunny Monterey Bay, which I'm upset because we're in the midst of 6 days of rain, and like, don't get me wrong, we need it, and things are so lusciously beautifully green outside, but I'm kind of over it right now.
Yeah,
I have been having thunderstorms, so if for some reason I just go poof, that's how you know why. I do have some very awesome news though.
Esther, I do have a copy of the book.
Yes, she did not call me to like help her through that. But I just didn't have time today because I was like getting ready for the stream up until like the last minute. But I finally have the hardware that I need to hang a quilt along the ceiling.
Very exciting.
I had to order half of it online because for some reason you can't find 4-pound command strips anywhere.
Oh,
it's either like no pound or 25 pounds.
Wow, I would like to find some 25 pounds because like all I could find is like 5 pound. What in the heck? I need to come up there. You need to come down here.
Yeah. So anyways, so you're back from another dimension.
Well, I'm back from a series of road trips. The one was to my dad's, which was nice to spend time with my father, but he doesn't live in a particularly picturesque part of the country. He lives in eastern North Carolina, and there's not much to look at but pine trees. But then I went to Temecula. So I spent a couple days in San Diego and then a few days in Temecula, and the weather was glorious. Got back here to 80 degrees and humid. And then it rained, and then the weather changed again. So I'm getting similar, but maybe not quite as bad rain as you are. So
I think you're probably a little more humid too. We're not as humid.
Oh my God, yes, it's humid. It's terrible humid.
Janet just asked if more pounds would be better for my command strips. So Janet, in theory, yes. However, this little clip here, right? So here's my finger. So this thing that I'm using is the size of just the clippy part of this clip. So I'm using like 20 of them. So I don't need something to be 25 pounds. 4 per each is fine.
It's just
but if I did a lot bigger, this little tiny clip would just be like mostly command strip then. These smaller ones just fit right, so you can't see them really when you hang them up, and that's the reason for that. It was even like, maybe I'll have to buy the really big ones and just like cut them down. But like, you know, like who wants to, I don't want to do that. Like who wants to do that?
I do not complain about command strips. They are pretty decent. I have to say, I have hung a variety of things around my home. They're very difficult, you know, my walls are very difficult to hang things in. So command strips.
Arlene says she's 45 miles north of Temecula and it's cloudy there and chilly, but it's supposed to be 90 by Saturday. Arlene, that tells me that I would need to leave because 90 is that's uncomfortable for me.
But they got a dry 90. So it's
It's
not quite as bad as R90, but gosh, I'm sorry, Arlene. Apparently, I took the good weather with me because it was absolutely glorious. Just absolutely beautiful while I was there. And in fact,
poor
it was
thing.
colder in San Diego than it was here, which makes no sense because San Diego is supposed to be like, Southern California. Come on.
We did have a couple of toasty, like, oh, the ACs aren't on yet kind of nights.
Too early for AC. Too early.
Yeah, but I mean, like, let's get into quick announcements, and then you're gonna tell us a couple of things here. So, what am I doing here? Where's my screen? And I've got too many screens. But we can see this screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I know that I had, like, if you guys watched the video that we posted while Stephanie was away, of a quilt exhibit at the New England Quilt Museum, you should totally go watch it. If you haven't, it's under the videos tab, where normally you find this stuff under the live tab. Go watch it. It's really cool. And we debuted this calendar in there because you were watching and it was time to see May. But I had forgotten to post it. So it will be posted on the places. Don't worry. But the reason to post this right now is because, oh my God, it's already the 6th. But to remind you that on the 10th, we're going to do a stitch and glitch because we didn't do one all month of April because it was just too wild and crazy. And Stephanie's going to show us a bunch of pictures from her trip.
Yeah.
So you definitely want to come and watch that and hang out and sew and whatnot.
I have maybe 1 or 2 pictures to tantalize you with. But yeah, if you want to see particularly Arlene's potholder quilt pieces, you got to come Saturday.
Well, and I hope you have more photos than that because you were told.
Yes.
Yeah, you were told Arlene was supposed to make you if you didn't. Did she make you?
She did. She made me.
Okay. I have to check it. So then Steph and I are traveling next week again because we're going to the Penn's Dry Goods show. So we should have stories for that. It's just, oh my God, it's stuff. It's just, it's a lot of stuff going on.
The glasses are all fogged up.
And then before we get going here, Arlene, you tried. You promised me. You make sure she has to put it.
We did. I've showed you some of them. Come on now.
Okay, I'm just making sure. I'm making sure. So then for the 13th, we're reading chapters 4 and 5, which are pages 60 through 104. Don't be scared. It's a lot of photos. And like when I say a lot, I mean like a lot. Like eye candy. So save time for looking at that. So with that, Stephanie, you got some stuff to tell us about before we really get rolling.
So I kind of went through it a little bit of stuff on my stream yesterday, but I did just come back from a wonderful quilt history retreat in Temecula. Our friend Leah Zieber puts on this wonderful thing every year. Fortunately for her, because she's got other things she wants to do, but unfortunately for us, she is discontinuing it after this year. So sadly, if you didn't get a chance to go, you are now out of luck. I've heard some rumblings maybe about somebody else taking over and doing a similar thing on the West Coast. Also, maybe some rumblings about a similar thing happening on the East Coast. So there may be things coming in the future. But it takes this quilt retreat that our friend Leah puts on. It takes place in Temecula, in the Temecula Valley, and it is surrounded by beautiful land. It's all vineyards. I don't know, and Arlene, if you know, let me know, because I really don't know how long this vineyard situation's been down there. It was literally like just a couple of years ago I found out that there are wineries in Southern California, because whenever I hear about California wine, I immediately think Napa Valley, which is in Northern California. But the climate, the soil, the sun, the geography, all that stuff, I think is very conducive to the grape growing. I also saw there was an olive orchard out there. And what occurred to me, and I kind of confirmed this with my husband's cousin, who we also saw out there, that it's kind of like Tuscany. Like, it's kind of that Mediterranean, like it's warm, it's hot, but it gets cold. And like, that's a thing the grapes need. Like, they need warm days and cold nights kind of thing. So who knew? Anyway, it is beautiful there. And the retreat center where we stayed is, it's like a Catholic retreat center. And there is a convent for retired nuns, or a convent and convalescent center, I guess, basically like a nursing home for retired nuns, all on this property. And apparently all of the Southern California quilt guilds utilize it. So there's a lot of quilty stuff going on there, besides the fact that there's retired nuns. I've never seen any of the nuns the 2 years I've been there. So I think they keep to themselves, I suppose. I think they're pretty elderly. Okay. So Temecula's been Southern wine country for us for a long time. People buy large areas of land, and growing grapes is a good write-off. Okay. So many of the wineries get their grapes locally. Yeah. And my husband actually said this to me. He's like, haha, European tariffs. California wine value is on its way up. So hopefully that's good for the wineries. And I got to eat at one of the wineries. I don't drink wine, much to the dismay, I think, of everyone in the Temecula Valley. But the winery that my cousin's, or Rob's cousin's wife belongs to, we went there for lunch, and the food was, mwah, it was delicious. So they got a good thing going on there, and it's a beautiful place to visit. And also, it's a fun place to go and spend a few days talking about quilts.
Yeah, I heard there were a few quilts there.
Yeah, just a few. So let's see.
I also noticed, to my surprise, that my face is not near as red as it was on our last stream. So that's nice.
And look, I've got some roses in my cheeks. I'm not as deathly pale. All right, so let me share. All right, I got to do the thing where I have to do this weird thing where I share so you can see it, but also so that our friends can see it. So can you see what I've got here, Jill?
Oh, don't worry about the Zoom. I just watched the feed.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure, but you should be able to see this through the Zoom too. So these are two of the blocks that Arlene obtained.
But for background story, if you guys were here last week, I had shared a listing on Facebook in one of the, there's a group for buying and selling quilts. And I shared a listing of someone that was a dealer that was selling potholder blocks. And Arlene went and bought them.
Yes. Arlene haggled with him. And so she was able to get them for less than what he originally had posted them for, because I think she was like, come on, dude, are you kidding? But they are fantastic, and there are some that were not. She let me touch them. She let me photograph them, and it was very well lit there in the retreat center. So we got really good pictures of everything. But this is just two of them together, and you can see she has them wrapped in acid-free paper, so you could see some of the others there through the acid-free paper. But
this one with the check, those tiny, how big are those small blocks in the center? So
the blocks are about maybe about 14 inches. They're 12, 14 inches. I can't remember. I don't think they're 16. I think that's a little too big. Although I'm really, really bad with, they could be, I don't know. I think they're 12 or 14 inches. I'm so terrible with like measurements, and in any event, they're large. They're not gigantic, but they're large-ish. All together, they would have made, a nice big quilt. But yeah, so those little blocks, those little tiny, the little tiny squares, they're less than an inch. They're probably about a half inch, I would say.
It's funny because they were all meticulous making these like small little blocks in the center, but then when they get to like that border, they were just kind of like, whatever.
Yeah, and so Arlene reminded me, so they're about 15 inches. So yeah, I was right. They're a little less than 16. So, and the little squares are about a half to a 3/4 of an inch, and they're applique on. Yes, that was the part I forgot.
Okay, that makes things seem a little less crazy.
And this is the one that was machine quilted.
Okay.
They're all hand quilted except for this one, and I think there's one that is not bound that I think is also, if I'm remembering correctly.
The fabric in the other one there is really great.
Yes, and you know what's interesting is there are fabrics in here that were completely new to me. Now, granted, I really struggle with my 19th century fabrics. I try. But, you know, there's stuff I see that I'm like, oh yes, I've definitely seen that in other quilts. But there were prints in these blocks that were not familiar to me. And so I have more info to tell you. There are some inscriptions. There's potentially some states here where Arlene said she's not done much genealogical research in her quilt study past, but she wants to give it a shot with this because there are some inscriptions. Some of it's hard to read. But yeah, these are really, really interesting.
Well, considering that Pam certainly wouldn't mind seeing those in person. Arlene, maybe you're just going to have to figure out how to get your butt to the Portland seminar.
Is this hand quilted? I guess maybe it is. I thought this was the one that was machine quilted.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, she said these are both hand quilted. 2 others were machine quilted. So, yeah, this person's stitches were very regular. That's why it looked. And that's the thing, that the handwork on these is really beautiful. These were clearly made for the most part by people that I think were skilled needleworkers. There's some like this block pattern, like this is interesting. I've never seen anything like this before, and this is appliqued, I think. Yeah, I think this one's appliqued. To me, this looks like the person just kind of they improv'd. They went, I like how all these pieces go together. It may very well be a pattern, but I've never seen it before, and to me it was sort of improv.
It's a new to you pattern.
New to me, and the fact that it's appliqued also is just very, very interesting.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the rest of them. That's going to be very exciting. So remember, we're going to look at those on our Stitch and Glitch on Saturday, and we start that around 2 p.m. and we often go for like 3 hours.
We go until we're hungry.
Yeah, if Stephanie doesn't talk about food the whole time. But yeah, we're just hanging out, and we're usually stitching or working on something. It's so if you need some company while you're doing some chores or in your sewing room, you should come for that.
For sure. And it's so always very casual. We don't really have much of an agenda other than I will show the rest of these blocks. So
you also maybe have a teaser from Temecula Pictures?
Oh, I do. Arlene says that this is unique, but she saw this shape or partial shape on another quilt. So interesting. So this picture does maybe not show like the beauty of the area, but it does show the beauty of the participants. So Arlene's in the middle. My mom is in the blue sweatshirt, and me, of course, there on the end. And you can see just a sliver of the wheelchair that Barbara Brackman was wheeling herself around in because she's got some back problems. So,
and you and Arlene clearly BFF'd and are wearing the same exact tops.
Possibly, yes. So this was the day that we left. Arlene, I'm sure, was very tired because she was a busy helping Leah with some aspects of the retreat. And of course, me and my mom were like, oh, time to drive back to San Diego. We actually were on our way to lunch with my husband's cousin, but then we headed back to San Diego.
So you had a bad time.
Terrible.
Well, with that, I mean, let's get a crack in here on chapter 2.
Yeah, and to confirm, yes, Arlene, YouTube on Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern. We will jump on and do our Stitch and Glitch.
We'll be stitching and we'll be glitching.
And we'll be glitching. That happens a lot.
So
okay.
I really want to get like right in here and
Mhm.
tell you about something that I noticed and pondered very early on.
Okay.
Now, on 25, the like first column there, I think it's, well, for one, I think it's awesome that there's a continued reference against the early listservs of the 2000s. Yeah. It's like, oh man, that brings me back. But anyways, there's lots of names in here, and listing of collectors and dealers. Some specific names are like Laura Fisher, who we know who passed away in recent years. Wendy Reed, who I know lives in Maine and is part of the Portland Seminar Committee for American Quilt Study Group. And Deb Grana, that we see her name a lot, she was half of the curation team for the quilt exhibit in Tarrytown, New York, for last year's American Quilt Study Group seminar.
So have you seen any of our, I think Jill's been doing some reels lately on some of the newer stuff we've looked at, but we had some reels a while back. I think were they all on Instagram? I think they were all
they're on here too as shorts.
Oh, okay. So yes, so those quilts that were from Tarrytown, they're New York quilts. About half of them were Deb Grana's quilts, and half were Sharon Waddell's, and they are all fantastic. So check those out if you are not familiar.
Yeah, click on the shorts tab on our page and you can see those. But what I find interesting here is, and then I've noticed like, a continuation of it throughout, is constantly listing these collectors' names, which I find interesting because we often get a contrast of that with a lot of people that don't want their name shared. They don't want their quilts shared. So I find that very interesting, and it makes me wonder more what's driving that. Like the not wanting to be, wanting to keep your anonymity, not wanting things shared, where we have other people that are total opposite of the spectrum, that are like, share everything, put my name everywhere. I just find that very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I think one of the things, I mean, just kind of as an overall, Pam was sharing a lot while she was researching this because she was trying to find these quilts. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, you kind of keep things close to the vest when you're writing a book. I mean, the publisher makes you do that. We've talked to several of our friends who are authors, but also you kind of have to, it's almost like you have to spend money to make money. You have to share a little bit to get more back, Well,
no, but I'm talking about this from the collector perspective of sharing.
Yeah.
Because so many of our collector friends are anti nothing online.
Sure.
Maybe published might be a little different, but they don't necessarily want the world to see what they have, or they don't necessarily want their name attached to things. And
I don't necessarily know. I don't know. We could probably beat that dead horse for a long time until we get somebody on here that feels that way and wants to debate us.
I was like, All
right, who do you guys know? Who do you guys know that will come on and debate us? Because we're all about show it all.
Not even necessarily like debate, I'm just really curious, like why? Like, what's driving that? I do know, like, we have heard some stories that there was a particular point in time that people worried that people would come and steal their things.
Yes.
So I do know that at some point in time, it could still be true. There was at least a group of people that felt that way. And then that would make me go back to the people that are share. What do you think about that? Have you ever considered that as a possibility? But then I would also argue that if that was part of the nervousness in, like, let's say the 90s and early 2000s, it is way easier to find people now than it was then.
Yeah. Well, and lots of people also have things on, they put things on the Quilt Index, like whole collections on the Quilt Index. So, it becomes a source of research for people, and I don't know. I mean, you and I are very forward thinking about this. To me, like, again, unless you're doing research or you're going to publish a book or, for whatever reason you need to keep things under wraps. Like, maybe you're a collector and somebody is curating stuff out of your collection for a show. And sometimes that stuff can be kind of a long time, in progress. So, those to me are, reasons that make a lot of sense. So, I can say that, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Arlene says, I think part of that is some people want to reproduce a pattern from these old quilts, and there has been thievery in the past. So if it's out on the web, it can be stolen. I've heard that as well.
Yeah.
And I've also
here's what we have to say. Here's what we have to say about that: is if you want to pattern someone's quilt, ask them, and if they say no, respect it. Right.
I've also heard that, and again, I feel like some of these reasons they might just be outdated. I don't know if they're still their reasons. I've just heard past reasons that some people thought that like it might somehow affect the worth of their quilt or collection. I don't know why that would be. That wouldn't disturb a worth value to me. So I don't.
Well, on one hand, I could see where the worth of a quilt could be increased by having it online, because people could say, oh my gosh, something about this quilt you didn't know that makes it worth more. I can also see not wanting to put your stuff out there because you think it's worth something and you want to keep people thinking it's worth something, and you put it out there and all of the dealers and the collectors that are out there, looking online go, you paid how much for that? So I think there could be some ego preservation there. So, but what I can say, the names of people, I mean, some of the people, I know some of the people, and we both know some of the people that Pam has referenced in here that helped her. And, there's some people that have that have helped me. Louise Tiemann is on page 27. She found that newspaper clipping for Pam, and Louise has helped me and showed me some Bonnet Sue stuff. So some of the people in our community are so generous, like beyond belief. So.
Esther also pointed out that like AI is a big consideration too. Esther, it is now.
Yeah.
But when what we're talking about as people having ideas about not sharing, they super predate AI. Like, I don't think AI is necessarily a consideration for most of their consideration about it now. But yes, it could going forward absolutely be a big part of the discussion of.
And I absolutely think that, for modern quilters, absolutely. I think AI is a concern because of the very nature, the graphic nature of modern quilts. And somebody wants to make an image and a quilt. It would be so easy for AI to go like, oh, that's a pretty graphic quilt, snatch, and put it in like, who knows what, some horrible AI scene.
AI scene.
Yeah, I don't even know how to.
That's the technical term, everyone.
So.
All right. Well, I mean, we don't have to sit on my thing forever. I was just like, that is very interesting, and it makes me like, I'm gonna have to ask Wendy, like, the next time I talk to her, like, tell me, what makes you super excited to share when other people aren't? That was just very interesting. But you mentioned then, wait, you mentioned something else. Never mind. I was going to mention something on another page, but I was going to talk about this Godey's Lady thing. Have you come across this on still on 25, the next column over? The January 1835 issue of Godey's Ladies book suggests that making kettle holders of quilted patchwork and binding them with tape is a good exercise for children. But then Pam mentions like there's nothing that suggests that they were told to then like sew them all together. Have you come across that when you're looking in your
the few issues of Godey's I have are they're later. I have I think 2 that were during Sarah Hale's editorship, and then one that's post Sarah Hale. But yeah, I haven't seen anything about that in there, but it's interesting. Godey's is such an incredible resource. It was published for so long.
It really captures kind of like the zeitgeist of.
Yeah, for sure.
But I find one of the reasons I find this so particularly interesting is later into chapter 3. Pam mentions that on page 55. I'm not trying to jump ahead, but I'm just letting you know the reference now. So we'll forget it later. That Persis Sibley Andrews kept a diary, and in her diary entry, August 13th, 1848 is the earliest known reference to quote.
And she doesn't care for it. She doesn't care for it.
But that's not like this like incredible jump from this 1835 reference of like kids making these. So I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if that's just the earliest known reference right now. Like I wouldn't be surprised because we already know just from talking with Pam, if you guys weren't part of the lecture that she did for us, she's already found plenty of more things since the publication of this book, which like isn't that just a double-edged sword of
I know
searching and writing stuff. The hope we'll definitely remember we're doing an author interview with her when we're done with this book, so we'll have the chance to ask her to dive into that a little more. So for all we know, who knows, maybe she's found something that's earlier than 1848.
So I think on page 33, I'm just jumping in here where I had stuff noted. That is just such a cool quilt. And I want to say she showed this during the lecture. I think this was one of her slides, I think. And I just love these pictorial quilts. You know, it's the horses. Horses were obviously important to Emily Monroe. Yeah, I mean, it's so cool. And all the different flowers. And, you know, I think that level of, you know, I mean, it's applique. It's definitely a nice hand, you know, lap project. So it made sense to me that something like this would then, you know, that person would then make it into a potholder quilt.
It also makes me really just excited to know that it's in the collection of the New England Quilt Museum.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that might be why she showed it in her lecture. And then on the next page, probably one of my favorite parts of these two chapters is where she talks about, you know, the empirical research. So, you know, making her own quilt. And
I have photos of that.
Do you? So
I do.
So yeah, I loved how, you know, she talks about her aunt contributing blocks, and you know, she talks about, you know, the decisions in binding them. And this one in particular, I thought this was so cool because she's got like kind of her modern, like the quilt, the ribbons. I think they're in the middle. Those are the little ribbons that you can stick to the bottom of your name badge when you go to like an event. Anybody who's been to you know, modern quilt stuff, QuiltCon, people will have like a ton of them under their.
These ones specifically, it looks like, are from New England Quilt Study Group.
Yeah.
Seminars. The study center leader, roundtable leader, area representative, paper.
Yeah,
presenter.
that looks like AQSG stuff actually.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Okay, you said New
England. What did I say? Did I say something weird?
You said New England, but yes, AQSG.
Oh.
But yes,
who knows? For all we know, that year was New England.
Yeah, I have one that's first time attendee, study center leader. I have some of my QuiltCon ones. Those are crazy ones. Those are fun. And anyway,
my one from Perrytown is my most. What am I stuck on? Is my most involved one. Yeah. And yes, it's just right here chilling. Not because I made it, just because I didn't put it away.
Well, mine are all on my bulletin board on the other side of my desk. So, but what I was trying to say was I love the fact that she combined these quilt related ones from like adulthood with the 4-H ribbons that she got as a kid, and I just think that's just so cute and so cool. I love that so much. And I mean, and this is what they did with crazy quilts. Like, this is like typical crazy quilt kind of stuff. So I loved this, you know, as a quilt she made, but also the group one she made, I think, was really, really exciting.
Made by the Potholder Posse.
The Potholder Posse.
Like, put that in the bottom. I clearly, obviously, don't have photos of that one. The small one, the crazy one, that hangs in her office.
Ah, okay. Now, yeah, I met a member of the Potholder Posse. Actually, it's a person I already knew. I'm not going to name names because, you know, I try to be respectful of whether I don't know whether people might like to be named or not. But
Here's the potholder posse quilt.
yes, there is a potholder section in here made by a person I know, who said she was part of the potholder posse back when Pam was working on this stuff.
Well, and this would be, I guess, the best example of like having to let people know what you're working on, even though like you're kind of not supposed to let people know what you're working on, kind of a thing. Unless this came like far before the ideas of a book, but I kind of doubt it.
I always say, like, by the time she was working on this, I want to say she already knew she was going to write a book. She was just deep in her research. It would be my guess, but we'll have to ask her.
Janet says, I'm sorry I didn't keep my ribbons from 4-H to use at a crazy quilt. They didn't even have 4-H when I was a kid in my area. I guess I was too close to a city.
Yeah, I didn't do 4-H, but I did enter some stuff in the fair, so I have some fair ribbons. I'll have to dig those out. But back to the fact that I just loved her explaining, you know, how she did this, and there was this really touching point where it's probably on page. Page 35, the second column, the first paragraph. She talks about how she had received 43 blocks and she made 20 herself, and she collected the blocks in a pile, and every time a new one arrived, she'd pull them into her lap and leaf through them. And I love that, because like I do that too, you know, and especially if, you know, when because I applique a lot, and I, you know, made a lot of small blocks, my Meriwether wax quilt, and also the quilt study quilt I'm working on. And so you end up with this stack, and it's, you know, fun to leaf through them. But especially if they're made by other people and you've collected them for your own quilt. I love stories like that. That's what, to me, like making quilts, that's what it's all about. Studying them, I know, has different aspects, but the making of them is like, you know, near and dear. So
if it feels like, because I'm totally ready to go on to the next chapter, because that's got some meat in it, and but I just wanted to say, like, if it's felt like we super breezed through this chapter 2 here, it's because it's just a lot of the methodology of research, and that, I don't know about you, Steph, but that for me just doesn't necessarily bring up a lot of discussion, because it's just someone saying, I did this way, I did this way, I did this way. One thing I will point out here is that I do super, super love the fact that she put everything into databases, you know, to make graphs and things like that. I think, and the reason I think that is because I will say that reading about people's methodology for the average person is a bit of a slog to read. But being able to have that visual representation of what all of that means.
You don't necessarily really have to. Yeah. You don't necessarily have to read the details. You can look at this and see, like, yeah, New England was extremely represented in these.
Well, I mean, I feel like sometimes people, when they're doing their research of you know, groups of quilts and things, I feel like they need to do this more. I wish they would give a visual representation more, because I don't know about you, for me, as being an audio and a visual learner, I can quantify this better in a visual sense than just reading it. And like Esther, I get you, like team research all the way, but I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you, like reading through methodology is a slog. It just is. I love to see it in action more, and that's exactly what the next chapter does, which is why I'm just like, oh my god, because I also have questions for you, Stephanie, regarding this chapter. Mainly, so this chapter for 3 is the earliest potholder quilts, 1837 to 1850. Now, she is constantly talking about, she goes through each quilt that we talk about, and she talks about kind of the history that she found, the genealogy, she does that. It seems like such a heavy lift to me to do all this genealogy work.
Yes,
okay, so
it is.
So like I'm literally reading through all these stories, and I'm like, how I'm picturing when they're talking about, so this person was born, this person on this date, and they had these parents, and then this one married this one, and this one married this one, and this one moved over here, and this one went over here. Do you, when you guys are doing this, is it like a CSI episode where like you have all the photos on the wall and then you've got yarn like tying like
Um,
how do you keep it straight? Like how do you
yeah,
figure out the
yeah,
photos?
everybody. So, because to give a little bit of background on this, I am like a baby genealogist. I can do some really basic genealogical research. I've hit some brick walls in my own family, but I actually work with some genealogists. They're actually genetic genealogists, so they're kind of doing modern day stuff. But their work does have, and they all started as like traditional genealogists. So yeah, they do have to go back in time, and I've learned a lot of stuff from them, but it is challenging, and especially when you're dealing with the years that are being dealt with in antique quilts. I mean, you're talking 19th century. Um, there was one census in the 19th century that is like there are no records of it because it was destroyed in a fire. I can't remember if it's 1880 or 1890. It's one of those. Before like 1870, I think all censuses only listed the householder, so the man, the adult man. Everybody else is just listed as like there is an adult female. There are this many children between the ages of da 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 da. So you have to find other sources. You can't just rely on a census. The censuses will give you like a general idea of where a family might have lived. But then you have to know that like this was this woman's husband, this was this woman's father. And you have to look at, say, probate records. Probate records actually give you the best information. But if you're dealing with people that did not have property, or at least a minimal amount of wealth, there may maybe be no probate records. So it can be very, very time consuming. There's a couple of people sort of in our community that do like find needles in haystacks. And I literally think they must sit there just for hours, like just staring at microfiche and staring at, like all of these records.
I can't even imagine how people keep it straight. Like I had taken from the Winter Virtual Seminar for American Quilt Study Group, I took a study center. And for those that don't know what study centers are, they're basically lectures from someone that was talking about like intro to genealogy research.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think I was there because I was like one of the room monitors, but I picked that one because I'm like, that sounds interesting. My head didn't just explode, like it just peeled open.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm literally like, I'm trying to like, there was so much. Keep in mind, she said basic, okay? Basic. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
I think I asked her at the end, I'm like, do you teach a class? Like where you like hold people's hands while they like, has anyone seen Stranger Things where they like go into the upside down and like, cause it's, oh
I
my.
promise you that wading into census and newspapers and all that stuff is not nearly as terrifying as the upside down. So Robin said, hubby's family has done a huge family tree, deaths, divorces, remarriages. It's approximately 8-foot square piece of work. Yes, that's one way. That's often how when people are doing their own families, that yes, a giant piece of paper. And Arlene says newspapers. Yes, newspapers are also another really important aspect, especially when you're talking about 19th century, because things were reported in towns, especially small towns. You will find things reported about people, and then you can start to make those connections. I have some things to talk about when we get to the Sarah Levitt quilt.
I was just going to bring up Sarah Levitt because I think it's important that we talk about this quilt because this is the quilt that started it all.
Yes. But one moment, because there was a couple things I wanted to point out that I thought were interesting. So on page 40, this is kind of down talking about this quilt. The entire perimeter, so this is like the very center paragraph. It says the entire perimeter is bound with a bias cut single layer of brown cotton print. And this is 1838, right? That, again, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know some of our friends will yell at me and correct me, but I think I can say with pretty good certainty that The majority, now there's always outliers, this quilt being one of them, the majority of quilts in the 1800s are not bias bound because they don't need it. Like a square quilt does not need bias binding. You only need bias binding if you've got curves. Or you're rounded your corners. It's nice to have a bias binding. Although I've seen a lot of quilts that even with curves, they use straight of grain. So the fact that this quilt is a bias cut binding is really, really interesting to me. I'm wondering if it maybe, I don't know. I mean, there doesn't seem to be anything like necessarily special about the fabrics in this quilt. I was kind of thinking like, well, maybe there was some bias cut fabric was available to them because of some dressmaking or something like that. But bias cut fabric, it takes up, it's almost like a waste of fabric in some cases because you have to take the diagonal. So that was very interesting to me. On page 41, the very first paragraph says 25 separate inscriptions appear on the backs of the blocks. My question about that is, and I haven't studied that many inscripted quilts, although I've looked at a lot of them, but I haven't really studied them extensively. How common is that? Typically, we look at the quote unquote friendship quilts or the signature quilts, they're on the front.
I have, so let's see, yes, this quilt, so this is the Margaret Wire Lock quilt, 1838. So if you remember, I have that paneled chintz quilt that looks whole cloth, but it's not. It's cut into strips. And the signature and the date are on the back.
Okay.
So I'm wondering, like, if...
Yeah, that's right. I do remember that now.
That one that's 1840. I'm pretty sure, isn't that quilt 1840? I'm pretty sure it's 1840. So I'm wondering if, like, since it's close to this date, like, I don't know, is there a small blip of time where people were more commonly signing things on the back? Because I was looking at the blocks, and it's not a scenario per se where they couldn't sign on the blocks, although they didn't pick really any blocks that offers a good center spot.
Right, yeah. And what is that common, and I'm sure there's definitely some in the book here, it's the either chimney sweep block or also called a friendship block, where it's kind of like you've kind of got a cross shaped in the way that you put the pieces together, and you end up with this kind of cross shape. And I see like lots and lots of signature / friendship quilts that have, they utilize that space. So I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, the other thing I would wonder about, which obviously like we don't necessarily know for sure, is doing it on the back also means that you could have people making blocks that aren't the people that signed them. You know what I'm saying? Like,
sure.
Like if Gretchen was like, all right, you guys, I got you, I'll make 10. And then just like passes them out and people sign them after. Not to say that they can't sign them on the front, but I'm just saying like, they wouldn't, be strategic about it. But again, that's another thing, like, write that down to ask Pam, like how common did she find that? Because I don't think so far she's mentioned that was common or not. Not that I recall her saying in here. But on to, I mean, we will definitely talk about Sarah, but like the next one in here, the Portland Halves quilt in 1843.
I think this is in Deb Grana's collection, right?
So it says it contributed by Deb Grana, but later on it says that when I acquired, so I don't know if she's acquired these from Deb or if...
Yeah, so I think that I think that section is written by Deb.
I wasn't sure because it's not a quotation.
That's why I was wondering. I suspect that section's written by Deb. But what I was going to say is it says that the halves quilt is from the collection of Deb Grana. Both of them say collection of Deb Grana. This one, I didn't really have a whole lot to that I wanted to say about this other than it's a cool quilt, and I'm so like, why was it cut in half, and what is the deal with like these diagonal cuts? Like, what they clearly were trying to cover something, or like there was some specific use for these quilts as they were cut, but I'm like, is it for some smaller beds that had some weird feature? I just...
So it's interesting that that's what you were grappling with while dealing with this. My brain didn't even go there. My brain went to the fact that these were found at a yard sale.
Oh, I know, right?
So I guess you were looking at it.
1843.
Yeah, you were looking at it from the perspective of like a maker and a use and a this and a that, and I looked at it as like the dealer sense of like, everybody, see, this is why you got to go to yard sales. Like, even because the one thing that stinks though, I'm sure we could find out, but it doesn't mention how much Deb paid for them at a yard sale,
You
which
know,
I would be very curious to know.
I would too, but I mean, I'm kind of thinking like at a yard sale, probably not much. You know, I
You
mean,
would think, but I have been to yard sales that they really thought they were the Sotheby's showroom. Okay, so
I mean, yeah, I mean, I would say somebody look, I mean, I would say that somebody who would sell a quilt at a yard sale probably doesn't know that much about quilts.
agreed, but you never know. But it's funny, like I founded a village-wide yard sale in upstate New York. Sarah, I don't know if you're watching, but remember our talk about yard sales? Apparently, we need to be going to the yard sales too.
Now,
I thought that
the
was-
one block made by Dorcas Merrill, first of all, isn't Dorcas such a sad name to have? Says Stephanie Dyke. I feel like my last name is so awful that I can make fun of people that have awful names, but Dorcas always just feels like such an awful name. Dorcas.
I mean, later on we come across an Ursula, and I was like, God, that is not a name that rolls off the tongue, you know,
Ursula?
like unless if you say Ursula,
Uh-huh.
but it's Ursula. It's with a U, not an A. So I don't know if later on Ursula was a variation of that, or if people were just butchering
Oh.
it.
Huh.
Ursula.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Robin
See what I
said her
mean? It
kids
doesn't.
had a...
You have to think it doesn't roll off the tongue. Ursula.
Robin said my kids had a preschool teacher named Dorcas, and Esther says she thought that Esther was challenging. I think Esther's one of those cool names. It's like an old-fashioned name, and like names like that are making a comeback. I think Esther's a very cool name. So, but Dorcas, I mean, God bless you.
Yeah. So Esther, if your last name or something was Dorcas, then you just forget it.
But what I was going to say is that single block that Dorcas made,
the Merrill block.
oh my gosh, that's beautiful. The way she like fussy cut that piece, and it's inscribed in the center, and I mean, it looks like something to be framed, you know. And you know, my guess is it was supposed to be contributed to some quilt, but it never was. So
Because it was too pretty. Maybe it made all the other ones look bad.
maybe. Oh, well, yeah, maybe somebody was like, I'm not putting Dorcas's in here. It's gonna make all the rest of us look like, you know, we quilted with our toes.
I'm gonna skip ahead.
Well, one thing I wanted to note about the Pomeroy quilt on page 44, I think it's interesting the printed piece, and she notes that they're probably printed with a home printing press. And I think that's fascinating. And you guys know I can bring Dr. Dunton into anything about quilts. Dr. Dunton, at the age of 14 in, let's see, that would be like 1880 something. He had his own printing press at the age of 14 and printed a cookbook. So printing presses were something that people, I mean, I don't want to say like super wealthy, but people of means had home printing presses. Like, so interesting. You know, like it's just so
I feel like
fascinating
today
to me.
that's along the lines of like having like your own like Cricut machine at home.
Okay. Yeah, I guess.
or an AccuQuilt cutter.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Like they're expensive, but they're not like, holy God, it's like buying a car. But you know, and only the people that have them are really the only ones that really see the value of being able to put
Now,
those through.
yeah, on page 46, though, she also references where she's talking about blocks worked in, you know, wool and silk, crewel, cross stitch, etc. She also says some have embroidered signatures and some are lettered with a home style printing kit. Now, with that, I suspect she's actually referencing those little, like the block stamp, you know, the stamps. There are also the little stencils, and there are ones where you'd have the type that you could put in there to make your own name. I suspect when she's talking about printing kit, that's what she means there. So, it's just interesting because like today you think about, well, I'm going to print on something, you know, you think about maybe using rubber stamps, or maybe using like fabric markers, or putting stuff through your inkjet printer, like, we think of these things as like these modern methods, but they had all that stuff back then too. Just, the 1800s version of it.
Janet just came in and said Dorcas is the Greek version of Tabitha. And it's from the Old Testament. And then she said, I like Tabitha better. Yep, Team Tabitha over here.
Team Tabitha. Yes, Esther is regal, by the way. Wasn't Esther a queen, I believe? Was it Queen Esther? My Old Testament is not great. So. Also, I wanted to make the point on page 47, these two images. So the Marianne Hardy, the one on the right, was painted by her brother when she was about 12 years old. The portrait on the left is painted by Marianne Hardy. I have to say, I think Marianne Hardy was a more skilled painter than her brother. I don't think that the picture of her is terrible, but it seems very flat to me. Like, it doesn't capture this essence, it kind of just gives her, resting bee face. Whereas the portrait of the young child, I feel like, has a little bit more effervescence to it. Just my opinion.
I like that this bigger portrait is in the collection of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. I was just looking too, is this the quilt that has some stitching in hair?
Yes, I think it is. And
I'm just looking for where it says.
No, it's not. It's the one that has. It's the Paris Hill Friendship Quilt that has the hair.
So
yeah, I was hoping that there would be something. There would be a picture, and there wasn't. I was sad. All right,
maybe it wasn't really super possible, but.
All right, so the Sarah Levitt quilt. This is just an incredible looking quilt. I think it's a beautiful quilt.
It's funny, if you didn't do the scale, I would kind of think it was a pillowcase based on the top there, with that big seam. Obviously, it's not. It's a quilt, but.
And it's a shame. I know there's another picture that shows that I think she has a better angle, showing the stitching at the top. But like in this full picture of the quilt, it's very hard to like. It's almost impossible to see the stitching at the top.
I think you're talking about a picture that was.
It was earlier. Like I want to say it's the very beginning of this section of our reading. Was it? Yeah, it was. It's one of the first pictures. Yeah.
Well, even it's pictures of the name and the date in cross stitch, but the way the photo is done, I kind of wish they'd done it in black and white because it's
so
very
you can see it a little better.
Yeah, it's really hard to see what it is, and stuff like that. You kind of have to manipulate the photo in order to be able to see. But this is the quilt that started.
And I love the fact that she wanted this quilt and her aunt helped her buy it because she was out of town. And she was after this quilt not because of the way it was made, but because of the name that she was hoping to find something that was her, within her family, to be able to research, which is an awesome reason to want to research a quilt or, to study a quilt. But then for it to then be like, okay, this quilt is so weird. The way it's constructed, you got to go down that rabbit hole. So I loved the story about Pam making her own potholder quilts, but I think then this story about the Sarah Levitt quilt is kind of my second favorite thing about this. And I felt her pain as I was reading this, because on page 49 she says, the top there, it says, with this date range, I began searching for a Sarah A. Levitt who would have been born between 1822 and 1832. To my dismay, I discovered that there were 14 young women that kind of fell in this category. And that is the problem that you have when you're researching these families, because they named themselves after each other. The number of women that named one of their children after themselves was shocking. Like today, you don't often see women naming a child after themselves. Like you're not going to see.
Yeah, we go more for middle names.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, you do obviously still see men who they're name their sons, but you don't see it as much with women. However, back then, if your name was Elizabeth, there's a good chance one of your children was also going to be named Elizabeth. And like, it is so frustrating. And it, compounds the issue that, women are not named as much in historical stuff as men are. So you often will see a woman is just referred to as Mrs. whatever. Yeah.
Mrs. Henry Thomas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the only reason you're going to find out who she was her marriage certificate.
Mm-hmm. Or, well, yeah, the marriage certificate or some reference, in a newspaper or some other kind, or probate, wills and probates.
Do you guys deal much with birth certificates?
Not really, because birth certificates are, at least in the United States, are a fairly new form of documentation. Like
would the only
states,
real documentation then have been the family Bibles? Mm-hmm. Would that have been when everyone was?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, when you're going back into the 1800s, certainly newspapers are in bigger cities, newspapers and things like that are good. Census for the later part of the 19th century, you'll find stuff. There are certain, and I don't want to get like too in the weeds here, but there are, for certain groups of people, there are certain sources. So for instance, enslaved people that, after emancipation, there were railroad workers. A lot of emancipated people became railroad workers. And then you had also, it's like a banking situation where, formerly enslaved people could register with this bank, like to bank, for banking to keep their money. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole bunch of registration there that has people's names documented. So that's like this really rich source of information. The railroads in general are a rich source of information, but again, you're like talking about men. So yeah, the baptismal and christening stuff is sometimes helpful with the churches. I mean, yeah, marriage and births that are recorded by churches are really more common. As an example, I think birth certificates were not required in some states until literally the mid 20th century.
Get out, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would find death certificates. Yeah, you'd find death certificates in some cases before marriage and birth certificates were ever required. So now, if you're seeking out people who like early 20th century, birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates galore.
You get a certificate, you get a certificate, and you get a certificate.
Yeah, those are much easier to find. So yeah.
I mean, it's funny, you were saying like you felt Pam's pain as she came up with 14, Sarah A. People.
And, the thing is about a name like Levitt. Now, Levitt may have been a very, very common name in this part of New England, and that is my guess. But, I mean, a name like Levitt is not like Smith. I mean, God forbid. If you've got a family member whose last name is like Jones, Smith, Johnson, good luck. Unless their first name is something super weird.
Like Dorcas?
Oh, even then, though, I mean, some names are very common back then, like that we wouldn't use necessarily today. Things like Ebenezer and Jeremiah and Jebediah, you would not believe. Like, you think Ebenezer. How many people are going to be named as Ebenezer Smith? Well, there's like 27 of them, and I'm making that up.
You've also got the, part of this whole like bushrod.
Okay, I had that marked because Bushrod Washington Hill is probably easy to find because of his bizarre name. Like Bushrod? Like, what kind of name is that? What was his nickname? Bushy or Rod? I don't know.
Or he didn't have a nickname and you had to say all that jazz every single time. But like, no, like when you're saying you felt her pain about like finding 14 Sarahs, I felt her pain discovering that she thought this was her great-great-grandmother.
And it's not. Wasn't. Yeah, that too. And I have been down, now I don't have any actual material objects, but I went down a path thinking I had found this woman who was my great-grandmother's mother. No, my great-grandmother's grandmother. And it was not her. I ended up, once I finally, like, she was a widow, so there was like lots of information about her. That's the great thing. If you have a relative who was a widow, there's gonna be more information about them, quite possibly, in censuses and probates and stuff.
Because
and
they can become a household unit.
they could either inherit their husband's, whatever, whatever they had, or they could own their own business, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's so easy to go down the wrong path because of names. Names are, they loved the biblical names. They love to name each other after themselves. There's that. I've seen things where it's like families, like there had to be a John in the generation. There had to be, a Thomas in the generation, and just, and some of them are literally stacked up so much, and you have uncles in there too. Like Dr. Dunton was not named after his father. He was named after his uncle. And they were both doctors. They both worked at the same hospital.
My brother and I get our middle names from an uncle and an aunt.
Yeah.
Both on my dad's side. I guess my mom was like, screw my side. I remember. But I find this interesting because Pam did a ton. There's no way I'm really going to try to like summarize, okay, the genealogy work that she did here, because
as I was reading through this, I was like, I felt like I needed the strings.
Yeah, I was having a really hard time like visualizing all of it. But what's interesting is the path that she ended up taking. This quilt came out of an estate. Oh, it doesn't say it in there. It's of an estate auction of a particular family. Where's
Marion Hill Hoyt's family.
There we go. And Pam, through her genealogy research, found out that like historically, those two families only lived one block away from each other. So she was trying to figure out how could this have been connected, and how did this family that's not genealogically connected end up with this quilt. And she does say like, I've only got a theory, but
I think they're very
finding people that live at the same time.
I think they're very good theories. Like, the family needed money, so they sold some of their things to neighbors, or upon the death, the neighbors found out.
I was just gonna say, like, she found out that this Sarah Levitt was a dressmaker, and could, the woman that had this in her probate there in her, she was wealthier, so could this have been her dressmaker? Or it's funny, we know people that don't like theoretical thinking like that, and I am pro theoretical story. As long as you're claiming that it's a theory,
exactly,
then I'm all for it. Because there's so many reasons that we can't know all the answers, and it makes me very frustrated. But I think to a certain extent, and there's definitely a difference between like logical theoretical thinking and like bananas theoretical thinking. And I think at least you and I are pretty good at like distinguishing, like, okay, this is a bananas theory, and like this one, like if they lived a block apart, I think that's a pretty logical theoretical theory, like, to be thinking there. And also, like, if this isn't gonna be her relative, I think that's a pretty good runner-up scenario to have, that these two families were somehow connected. And even if it wasn't with this quilt, they were clearly connected. Like, you don't live neighbors with each other and be like, oh, I don't know who that person is. There's only 12 of us on this block, but like, I don't know who that is. Like, that's how things work now, where you have no idea who your neighbor is. It did not work that way then.
Correct. Yep. I also liked where she added in the information that, if this was the Sarah, if this was the correct Sarah, that the Sarah Levitt was boarding at a residence of Mary Jones, and she was working at the Stark Corporation, right? So, so this is the Mills, and how, it made sense to live away from home and closer to her job, because they had like a half-hour break for meals, and they worked 11 hours a day. Like,
and her family house was more than a mile away.
A mile and a half away, which she would have had, no doubt, would have had to walk. She didn't have, I mean, certainly probably didn't have any other
and
means
that
of
probably would have
conveyance.
taken a good 15-20 minutes each way. So she could have eaten her lunch to,
Yeah. Also, did these people die of tuberculosis at the drop of a hat? Holy Moses. And also, I'm kind of wondering, like, how long does tuberculosis live on a quilt? Because, dang.
Thanks for just introducing like a whole new, like, new fear unlocked.
So, Pam, in handling these quilts, have you had a TB test? Because everybody in this family died of tuberculosis. It was a common illness at the time. The consumption.
Yeah, I mean, this, if anyone was behind on their reading, and you feel like you have to kind of breeze through this chapter, like the quilt you need to pay the most attention to, in my opinion, is the Sarah Lovett quilt, because I can't, like, we're gonna have to ask her how long it really took to piece this story together, because I know it's in the writing, it's only 4, but it had to have taken a significant. This is not a story she pieced together in an afternoon.
Well, plus, she's got a lot of the just the history of that area as well. And I mean, Manchester, I've been to Manchester, New Hampshire. It was an adorable town. I mean, that's, she probably didn't have to, like, go to the ends of the earth to get that history, but she did do some very, very targeted research on that too. So I would say, like, I can't imagine that this took her a long time, I think. And we will get the answer.
Yeah. Well, the last one that I want to mention, were you still going to talk about Sarah?
No, I'm done with Sarah. I'm done with her.
I was gonna say, like, the last one I really wanted to mention, like, there's another one or two in here, but, like, the last one I just really want to make sure that we mention is the Paris Hill Friendship Quilt, 1848, because it is so pretty.
Yes, this one is also very pretty, and
this one is the one that has hair, right?
Yeah, and I was trying to figure out, just from looking at the pictures, like, which one could it possibly have been in, and I kind of wonder if it's so fine. I mean, yeah, look at a piece of hair. It is so fine that
it's got like a cross, right, made out of hair.
However it's made, I'm just wondering if it is so fine that it's difficult to see.
You know what, sweetheart? Because I can see, like, one block. It looks like it might have, like, a name on it. Actually, more than one. You just got yourself a magnifying glass, didn't you?
I did, but I don't have it here on my desk.
No, I know, but I'm saying later.
Yeah, I'll give it a try.
Or if you can get actually, I see quite a few things with inking on here now. If you get a good picture with your phone, we can blow it up too. Oh, yeah, there's a lot. Actually, why didn't I pay attention? There's actually a lot of inscription on there. Where this is also the part where I had mentioned that this from Persis, that's another name, Persis, Sibley Andrews kept a diary for many years, and this is the first mention of block to block quilts from her diary entry, August 13th, 1848, and she says, "I have at last made my square to Mrs. Davis album quilt. And it is really beautiful. It contains all the work I have done in the week beside family cares. Quote, my baby has not been well. And is only 1 foot square, quilted and bound." That's a 1 foot. That always sounds bigger to me than 12 inches.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing, because, again, when I was doing my Dutton research, I found that, I guess it's before, like, from mid 20th century and before, they did not do things in inches, or at least early 20th century and before. They didn't do things in inches, they did things in feet. So you'll find 7-foot quilts. And it sounds enormous, but it's not really, it's like a king or queen size quilt.
She said, I did not approve of this way of making a quilt for the minister's wife, but I have a great deal of esteem and admiration for the lady, and beside wishing to be remembered by her, I wish to see the variety quilt finished, as it wanted only half a dozen of the required 70 before I made mine. I always find
So
it
she
funny.
was like, oh, all right, I'll make one. Also, the person who painted her picture, the baby's real weird looking. And
babies of this, I find that babies in these kinds of portraits are weird looking, and I find it has a lot to do with like their head size and shape.
I guess, I don't know, but it's a very, she doesn't look like a, I don't know, she just looks like I think she's probably a much lovelier person in person.
And so also I wanted to point out to you that this quilt apparently goes on display once a year in the summer at Hamlin Memorial Hall, which is a museum and a library, which sadly will not be when we are in Portland for seminar, but I'm actually wondering if this ends up being one of the quilts we see like on a tour somewhere or something.
Well, I would like to point out Persis Sibley's block. And not so much the block itself. I mean, it's a very cool block. You know, is it an 8-pointed star? Yeah, it's an 8-pointed star. But the embroidery that she did around her signature, I think, is really lovely. And you know, that kind of looks like one of those stamps, you know, and so I kind of wonder.
It does.
Yeah,
look
I'm kind of wondering if she maybe didn't like fully ink the stamp, but maybe kind of traced it in some way, because it doesn't look like, I mean, you can't see any evidence of the ink under there, or maybe it is there, I don't know. But in any event, I think that's really lovely how she embroidered that. That's not something I've seen very often. I know I've seen some kind of embellishment around signatures, but I feel like I don't see that very often.
At least as of yet, no, I haven't either. That could be another question there for Pam, like, was that something common? Because she does mention in the beginning that the majority of quilts she came across were inscribed. So she said, like, particularly that the majority of 19th century quilts made with some form of quilt as you go are inscribed. And I only just like happened to like look at my notes and be like, oh look, yeah, I did write that down.
It's really the last thing in here. I don't know if you had anything else about that quilt, but the last thing in here is the raffle quilt from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And this one, I think, you know, there's a lot of dark colors in it. You know, some of these other ones are very light colored and sort of more bright and cheery. But I really like this one because just looking kind of at some of the individual patterns that were used, they are very interesting. Like, this one, it looks like polka dots. Like, what is that? Like, you know, is that
There's a bigger one of that on, oh wait, is it not?
Yeah, and you know,
it's on the next page, isn't it? No,
yeah, I'm looking at it closely. It looks like snowballs. Yeah, it's similar to that one. Yeah, it's similar to that one, but it's not the same. You know, and there's some tumbling blocks, and there's just a lot of really cool stuff. And this is all silk. So, you know that this is like a very like lightweight and airy, but also, you know, like it's got gravitas. So
one thing that's very interesting too is the fact that from looking at all of these, because like she said, the majority of potholder quilts that she finds are New England, or they're clearly like she can make a direct line of like the transplant from New England. But finding out all of these things hiding in these small museums, because this quilt is Portsmouth Historical Society. If you've never been to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, oh my God, it is the quaintest seaside town. I would absolutely live there if it wasn't $1 million to live there. But it's a very cool town to visit. So like, and it has a couple of cool shops. But like, kind of being like, hey, there's another reason to go there to like see this quilt.
There is, and I did not flag this, but let me see if I can quickly find it, where she's talking about think it's at the very beginning here where she's kind of talking about okay. So page 30. She talks about, the majority of the quilts in the sample correspond to the size of typical bed quilts, blah, blah, blah. And she talks about the sizes of the blocks. So the smallest was a 4-block doll quilt. And then she says the number of blocks ranges from the 4-block doll quilt to a quilt containing more than 1,000 individually bound 2-inch blocks. And in fact, I probably will run this by Pam before we do her interview, because I'm curious to know if it is the same quilt that appears in Dr. Dunton's files.
Oh.
Because, yeah, and it was interesting because I had obtained Pam's book, and I had made my own kind of quilt as you go quilt for a show, and then I started researching Dunton. And I saw this picture, and the quilt was in very bad condition. So I'm kind of thinking it's maybe not the same quilt. But I want to show her that picture, and give her a chance to look at it before we put her on the spot.
I was going to say, have you like leafed through the book here to see if it's in here?
It's not. Okay. So there's just this reference to the 2-inch blocks, and I know Dunton made a big deal about these tiny little blocks, and there is a picture of it. It's a very bad picture though, so it's really kind of hard to see what's going on, but the quilt is like coming apart, like they're these tiny little blocks, and they're all kind of just coming apart from each other. But maybe somebody restored it. I don't know.
That would be very interesting though, especially if it's not the same.
Yeah, and Dunton did write a little blurb about it, so if it's not the same quilt, there's no telling where it really is now. But I might cement my membership in the Potholder Posse, because I know where there used to be one, even if we don't know where it is now.
Well, that sounds like a good note to wrap up on. Like, there was just no way to like keep this to an hour. No way.
I know.
We'd have to do like one chapter a night to always be like boom, boom, boom. But for anyone that came in late, for next week, for the 13th, we're going to do chapters 4 and 5, pages 60 to 104. And then this Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern here on YouTube, Stephanie and I will be doing a stitching glitch, which is just us hanging out, stitching and yakking. Hopefully it's not about food the whole time, because then I'm like eating my arm by the time we're done. But Stephanie is going to show us pictures from her trip to Temecula, including photos from the potholder blocks that Arlene bought, that she let Stephanie take all kinds of pictures of and is letting us share because she's so awesome and we love her. So if you want to see those, you gotta come hang with us on Saturday afternoon.
Yep. It's been a while since we've done a stitch and glitch. It'll be fun.
It has. It's been over a month because there was no way to do one in April. We would have died.
Yeah.
But yeah, with that, I'm gonna go eat dinner.
Yeah, I did have my dinner before, but it's about time for dessert, I think.
See, Robin, we can't wait either. It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. I always feel nice and rejuvenated after we do one. Believe it or not, even though it is work to kind of be on, and it feels nice to just hang out with friends. And
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So we look forward to see you guys, and if you're around on Thursday, you'll see me on Thursday on my stream, 2 p.m. Eastern. But we hope to see you on Saturday.
I'm excited.
Okay. Yeah, Arlene, if anything, if you don't make it or whatever, I understand. But yeah, if anybody has any info, I will definitely let you know.
Okay.
All right, guys.
Well, thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.